So when I play guitar here on the YouTubes, I generally get asked two questions. Today on Cryptic Mass Guitar, I want to try and help you with at least one of them. And the questions that I generally get are, number one, is this good for high gain? And number two, can it play AC/DC? And you know what? Let's address the AC/DC. That's your amp. That's really going to be your amp. You can get some pedals to do that stuff. You can play it with this. You can play it with a Les Paul, a Strat even, a Telecaster, an Ibanez. It's mainly going to be your amp. Humbuckers will help you out. That's definitely the case there. But today, we're going to take a look at the Gibson SG Tribute, and we're going to find out if it's good for high gain. So I don't want this long, drawn-out intro. Honestly, it's probably long enough as it is already. So I've got this set up in 3 different sections here. Section 1, we've got 2 sound samples with leads. First of which is DADGAD in C with a lead. Second is E-flat standard with a harmony section and a lead. Section 2 is one riff played through 12 different amp heads. That way you got your coverage for, hey, I have that amp, that amp. And then section 3, very simple, one riff with 6 different cabinets with different speakers in them. So let's start off with section number 1 here, shall we? Let's go and listen to the 2 sound samples that have leads. on to section 2. This may be a little bit long and maybe a little bit excessive, but I'm always asked in these videos, why didn't you play that amp? I have that amp. Why didn't you play that amp? Because I have quite a few. So we'll play one riff over and over and over again through 12 different amp heads. And you can comment in the comments below there. You can say, hey, I have that amp, or I don't like that amp, or I like that amp. I want to buy that amp. I would never buy that amp. That kind of thing here. That was a little bit long, wasn't it? Well, let's cut that in half. Let's play one riff through 6 different cabinets with 6 different sets of speakers. Now, I am not using IRs. These are 4x12 cabinets that I have in a treated room in my basement studio here. So I'm not using one of the usual suspects. I'm not using an SM57. I'm not using an E609 or an i5. Those are generally like the 3 normal ones, right? There's other ones, obviously. But I'm using a Neumann TLM 107. The reason I use that is because I play loud. I have a treated room that, saves my hearing, and there's not a ton of reflection in there. There's bass traps all over the place, and there's treatment on the walls, and there's deflection because there's a whole bunch of amps and different cabinets in that room. And the third reason here why I use a TLM 107, I did a shootout of like 35 or 37 different microphones on cabinets, and the Neumann TLM 107 was the one that accurately represented what the cabinet actually sounded like. The SM57, E609, and the i5, fantastic for full-on recordings that have bass in there. And what you end up hearing is, generally, I find it to be nasally. It's probably the wrong way of saying it, but you get a lot of mids, a lot of high mids, and a lot of high end. And it has this kind of synthetic low end, I find, which is filled in by a bass and your, kick drum and stuff like that. But for me, where I'm just playing with guitars and drums, I like actually having an accurate representation of the total package here. So the amp and the cabinet itself. So that's why I use a TLM 107. So I'm going to shut up now and let's listen to one riff, 6 different cabinets. And that wasn't as long as the one riff with 12 heads, now was it? Okay, so there's no more playing in this video. I just want to answer some questions that I know that I'm going to get. So I'll just kind of do that kind of quickly here. Pickups, 490R and 490T. These here are, like if I took this off the back, it's actually a PCB connection. So with PCB connections, you have to worry about if your knobs start to get loose. So over time, if they actually get loose, that the vibration from the guitar and the potentiometer and its connection to the PCB starts to get a little loose. And at that point, you can actually have some of your volume cut out. So what you would do is pop the knob off here and tighten it up. That'll fix it. Back to the pickups, but it's an important piece of information. But the pickups here, the 490R, 490T, they're a little on the hot side. They're not super skewed. So like the 61R and 61T that you would actually find in like the standard 61. They're a little more skewed on the low end and the high end. These here, they're not balanced by any means, but they're a little more balanced than those pickups. They are still hot, but there is a little more control over it. So when it comes to pickups, if they're skewed on whatever frequency, it just means you have to go over to your amp, which I don't have one right there, but you have to, adjust your settings. It's normal for any pickup. So these are great pickups. If they don't work for you, pretty easy to buy other pickups and install them. And the neck is the rounded profile. The rounded profile is not to be confused with the 50s Chunky C profile, which is thicker. And even thicker than that would be the one that I have on my 56 VOS, which is chunkier. We're going to call that the actual baseball bat. The reasons that necks used to be so thick is because they didn't use truss rods. They always did on Gibsons. Truss rods are a Gibson invention, so Gibson Electrics always had them, but it was just normal to have a thicker neck. They were V-shaped at one point because of that. And then from there on, because, Fender started adopting Gibson's truss rod, necks started to get thinner. So that's why, like when 1960 hit, they were called the blade style neck because they kind of shrunk them and made them thinner and thinner. Not Ibanez wizard thin, but you know what I mean. The rounded profile here, because it's a little thicker, there's this belief out there, and I mean I can see its point, where thinner necks can give you hand fatigue. So it's kind of one of those things where your hand is kind of pushed up like this and it gets cramped. I've never experienced that. However, I do prefer a chunkier, thicker neck, and at that point, you're not going to have that weird claw thing that everybody's so worried about and no one really ever experiences. And the last question, this thing's discontinued. There's a couple of things to go over here with this. This is a satin nitro finish on it, and it has a maple neck. That combination is generally because with satin nitro finishes, you actually feel a little more resonance in your body. So when you're playing, the vibration that you get is a little more low end than the high end, or that, mid presence that you get. It's a little lacking in that, so generally they slap on a maple neck because maple necks generally have a little bit of snap to them. So that kind of offsets that. There is a conspiracy theory, believe it or not, to where these were, because they have maple necks on the cheaper guitars and they got rid of them, that Gibson is trying to force people to, I don't know, they just, maple necks are stronger, so people are nuts. I'm crazy too. Like, don't mistake that. But people are nuts. There's some weird conspiracy theory. Basically, they discontinued the Tribute series because they had maple necks and they want necks that will break so people buy more guitars. Back to the AC/DC thing. Again, it's your amp, man. When it comes to Les Pauls against SGs, SGs are a little thinner than Les Pauls. That means there's a little more of that top end to them. So there's a little more like of the mid and high mids in them, whereas the Les Paul has, because there's a little more wood, has just a little bit more body to it. That means SGs cut through a little more. So if you want to get any SG, whether it be Epiphone or Gibson Custom or LTD or ESP or whoever makes an SG style guitar, that'll do. You'll feel maybe like the guy in AC/DC. The other one used Gretsch. I like Gretches too. But yeah, humbuckers and an amp. And if that amp doesn't do, your AC/DC, just maybe like a tube screamer and an EQ pedal. That way you'll figure your way around. Stop asking me about AC/DC, please. Thanks for watching.